From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts. Across America's nearly 90,000 local governments, from cities and towns to counties and school districts, leaders are doing the work of building stronger communities. And that work often depends on strong partnerships across every level of government. So we also welcome state leaders whose partnership is essential to helping local communities thrive. Here on this podcast, we explore practical lessons for leaders working to navigate complexity, earn trust, and help communities move forward together. Welcome. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman.
There's importance in being independent and that get it done by yourself. But I think having the humility to know you can work with one another, that's the difference between being a cowboy and a cowman.
Joining me today is Governor Mark Gordon, the 33rd governor of the great, beautiful state of Wyoming. Raised on his family's ranch, Governor Gordon has spent much of his life immersed in the industries and landscapes and communities that have shaped Wyoming's identity. Before being elected governor in 2018, he served as Wyoming State Treasurer and built a career as a rancher, businessman, and civic leader deeply connected to the opportunities and challenges of one of America's most rural states. Today, Wyoming is grappling with many of the same questions confronting communities across the country. How to preserve deeply held values while adapting to change, how to prepare the next generation for an uncertain future, and how to balance a spirit of independence with the shared responsibilities that bind communities together. I'm honored to explore Governor Gordon's journey to public leadership, the experiences and values that have shaped his leadership, and the practical lessons his years of service may offer local leaders working to strengthen communities of their own. Governor Gordon, it's an honor to meet you, and welcome to Community Catalysts.
Oh, Matt, thanks so much. I'm looking forward to the conversation. It is truly a great opportunity to have a chance to chat with you. So thanks.
Well, I'm so grateful for your time. Governor, let's start before politics, before public service, even before statewide office. For those of us like me whose understanding of ranch life doesn't extend much beyond watching the movie City Slickers, can you help us with a picture of what it was like growing up on your family's ranch in Wyoming? What were the rhythms and responsibilities that shaped you from a young age?
Yeah, well, thanks for that. As I think on it, it was a great experience growing up, and it's really proved valuable, I think, in later life. Just to sort of give you the context, our ranch is about 18 miles west of a community of 280 people, which is about 45 miles from the next biggest town, which is a few thousand people, couple thousand people at that time, and kind of out in the middle of nowhere. One of the things I always loved about growing up on a ranch is that everyone has value. I, as a kid, had chores I was expected to do, make sure the chickens were fed, make sure that things were done. I had lawn chores and others. And as I grew up, those morphed into making sure I stacked hay, making sure that I could run equipment. And as I say, everybody on a ranch is valuable, and it's really important that you step up and do your job. One of the things I think we learned early on too was if you got a neighbor, a big chore there, was always branding. We'd be there to help if there was a fire or something like that. So it was really community oriented. My parents, we lived up a valley, and there were just a few families there, but Dad had this little movie projector, and one of the big excitements was he would once a year rent a movie. This was before videos, before any of that stuff, and we'd set up in the ranch house. The neighbors would all come in. There'd be a community supper, and then we'd watch a movie, and then people would go about their things. And it was similar. Other families would host an evening or even write a play. Those are the things that were there. So I think I grew up really with a strong sense of community, and I think a sense of responsibility to my neighbors. And I think that's one of the things I've always loved about Wyoming.
Is there some particular memory that you carry that you find especially useful to you as a leader to this day?
Yeah, I would put it this way. There's two lessons I'll take from it. The first one, my dad was, and my mom both, we all, as I said, had a role to play on the ranch. And we had a cattle drive that was a pretty long drive every summer to take cows and calves from what was really our spring pasture up to our mountain pasture. And that was a pretty long 5, 6, 7 day ordeal. It started out down low, and because the days would get pretty warm. We'd do it in June. About this time, you would always get started early. Now, a lot of times these days, people drive with trailers and horses and all that sort of stuff. Not for my dad. My dad wanted to leave from the barn no later than 3 o'clock in the morning, which meant getting up at 2 and then getting our horses saddled. And then we would have to ride 9, 10, 11 miles out to some of the more distant pastures and start gathering. So you're a little kid. My horse was named Jimmy. He was not a pony. He was a smaller horse, but he was pretty fat. And so there you are on this little horse, and you're taken out and you're riding along, everybody's there. And then pretty soon you'd be going along and Dad would say, now, Mark, I want you to stay here. And when it gets light enough to see, I want you to gather everything around here and take it over to the gate over there by the reservoir or something like that. And then they'd ride off, and there you would be. It would be as dark as could be. And you're 7, 8, 9 years old, and you've been reading about dinosaurs, and dinosaurs existed in Wyoming, and maybe one was just over the hill there and about to come get you. And so you'd have a little bit of faith in your horse. It would be pitch dark. You could hear them riding off. You'd maybe hear a horse snort here and there, and their voices would get time, and then it'd be dead quiet. And then it would get really cold. And eventually, if you looked to the east, you'd see a little bit of a glimmer. And then pretty soon the sun would come up, it'd get a little bit colder. And then you could start to see things. And as a little kid, thinking about those dinosaurs or dragons or whatever was going to come get you, could be bears, lions, whatever. And then being able to see around you and see that on every hillside, there was one of the riders that you'd come out with. And for me, knowing that there can be some really dark, cold times that are terrifying, but understanding that if you're working together and you all know what you're trying to get done, that when the sun comes up, you're going to be able to see those riders everywhere. That was a huge lesson to me. The other lesson that came from that was, as I got older, you got more responsibility. And occasionally Dad would say something along the lines of, now, Mark, I want you to go gather that pasture and take them over to the other pasture. And you're still a pretty little kid. You got 400 or 500 head of cows. It's only you. And in political life, this has gotten much more valuable. You can't make every cow do exactly what you want. You've got to think ahead. You kind of got to guide the cows. You got to make sure that they have the idea that gate is exactly where they want to go at that time. And trying to think through that and think about, and I'm not really probably that bright, but trying to think I'm probably a little brighter than a cow, but thinking, okay, what is the cow looking for at this point, and trying to make sure that I could get them thinking that and moving that way. That's become incredibly valuable as a governor. Not to say that legislators all like a bunch of cows, but really being able to say, look, you're not going to get everything exactly the way you want, but if it's generally the direction you want to go, yeah, that's the kind of thing you want to have accomplished.
Tell me if I get the right two adjectives out of this. What I think I just heard you describe it in kind of reverse order was the lessons taught you both strategic thinking, but also taught you great patience and the confidence that comes from that patience. Am I hearing you right?
Yeah, I think that's a much more eloquent way of putting it than my long-windy. So, yeah.
I'm a professional summarizer, so I will always, don't try this at home. Um, Let me go a little bit deeper on that. We were talking before I hit the record button that my introduction to Wyoming in a big way, and frankly, my thanks for an introduction to you for this interview, was with Brian Farmer, the executive director of the Wyoming School Boards Association, who had me come out last fall and give a keynote for their annual conference. And it was last fall that Brian told me something that I've been researching since, and I really want to ask you about. It's the idea that there is something special in the culture of Wyoming. And I'm probably not going to say it, the most eloquent way, but my thought was that it's foundational somehow that independence and interdependence are not opposites. And you kind of alluded to this when you were talking about growing up on the ranch and working with your neighbors. So I just really want to ask you, is this idea of self-reliance and, the cowboy who pulls himself up by his bootstraps, and the idea of relying on your neighbors, is that just a good fable that we tell, or is that real and unique in the state of Wyoming?
I don't know as it's unique, but I will tell you it is fundamental to the character of people in Wyoming. And I'd put it a little bit this way. There is always that sort of notion of cowboys as being these rugged individualists who never never ask for help and are always going to be there in the most difficult circumstances, facing the wind. I think there's a lot of that in Wyoming. But a long time ago, I remember when I was saying to somebody, I'm just a cowboy at heart. And I was talking about it being independent and everything else. And my friend, who actually was a neighbor, we were partners in a ranch, he said, yeah, I used to be one of those, but now I'm a cowman. I think the difference there is when you get over the pride of I'm going to do this all myself, and you realize there's importance in being independent and that get it done by yourself. But I think having the humility to know you can work with one another, that's the difference between being a cowboy and a cowman.
A cowman relies on others and offers assistance as well as takes assistance.
You bet. It's a little bit more mature, maybe.
Governor, can I ask you, I can't imagine that a lot of people grow up thinking that they're going to be governor one day. Is there a particular person or opportunity or a moment that planted the seed in you that public service was going to become an important part of your career and your life's work?
I can honestly say it never crossed my mind that I would be governor. The little community that we had, there were always conservation districts, and there was a park board. Dad had been really involved in the county, both on the school board and joint powers boards and things like that. And I think one of the great things about Wyoming, like I said, everybody's valuable, so pretty much everybody has a role to play. So I don't think there was a seed that said, "Oh, I'm just going to be hanging out here, twiddling my thumbs." I think there was always I've got to be of service somehow. There's a progression that sort of happened to me in basically starting out at the park board, coaching soccer with kids, becoming involved in the conservation district, and just kind of progressing. I got very interested in schools. I was married, but my wife, it was a really sad thing. One morning was out running and was hit by a young man on his way to work in town. Rainy day, a lot of circumstances around it. It's one of those just tragic things. And I had a daughter that was 4 and a daughter that was 2. Luckily, being a rancher, I could kind of adjust my schedule to be there for my kids. And as I got involved, being there with my kids, got involved with the school. I think those things just progressed. I eventually ended up on the school board. So I can't say there was a moment or here's the person I want to be. What I can say is there always was a sense of, I don't know if you say obligation, but, commitment to the community. My family was fairly politically active on the other hand. And so, Malcolm Wallop, who was a senator, Cliff Hansen, a senator before that, were close family friends. So, there might have been a little bit of that passed off, but it wasn't ever in my mind.
Governor, I'm going to hit the fast forward button here because I really want to take a few minutes and talk about the state of Wyoming and the nature of public education. Because I had a real awakening as I visited with the School Boards Association last fall, and something that Brian Farmer really impressed upon me was that to understand Wyoming's future, it's necessary to understand the state's commitment to public education. He also told me that you are one of the strongest champions of public education. One of the things that I understand is remarkable in the state's history is that over time, Wyoming's leaders came to view public education not simply as a local responsibility, but as a statewide commitment. And in a state with vast distances and small communities and very different local economies, I understand that Wyoming concluded that students should have access to quality educational opportunities regardless of the wealth of their communities. Can I ask you to help set the context for that? Not everyone
Sure.
understands the way things work in Wyoming, and not just the history, but what's the meaning of that today?
Yeah, well, that guarantee of equal education is in our Constitution. Wyoming's Constitution is a remarkable document in many ways. We're the first to recognize suffrage for women. We're the first to build water law. And I don't think we're the first, but we're certainly highly committed to making sure that every child in Wyoming has a quality education, and it's guaranteed in the Constitution. And that's morphed from a time when the state didn't have a lot of money. My dad was on the school boards when it was up to the county, the community, to be able to do the best they could. And Wyoming, I know KC, the high school there, they just had to make the gymnasium about 4 foot shorter when he was there because they didn't have the money to make a full basketball court. But they were always committed to making sure that the educational opportunities were really strong. And we have community schools that are 6, I think actually even smaller than 6 students, up to fairly large high schools here in Cheyenne and Casper. Over time, as the state's wealth grew from the mineral state that we had, it became much more available for the state to sort of help. And some counties did particularly well. Campbell County, for instance, where a lot of coal was produced, Sublette County, where oil and gas was, they had phenomenal revenues coming in, and their schools and their facilities were substantially better than some of our poorer districts. And so there were lawsuits that happened, and eventually this understanding that it is partly the state's responsibility to guarantee that students have equal access and the same privileges. And there's been from time to time efforts to sort of figure out how to equalize that. And that continues to be a conversation to this day. So I think there was a fundamental belief that education, and this, it's sort of, let me put it this way. I'm interested in how we've evolved, because I think that generation that went through World War II, their understanding how you build a better life is you have a great education. And I think that was a big fundamental part of Wyoming, was we want to make sure our kids have access to the best education. Our university was actually established well before statehood. Our commitment to the university was pretty much absolute, wanting to make it reasonable to be able to attend and provide a broad range of classes. And there was a tremendous amount of pride there. As I think probably most people listening to this podcast know, that the conversation about education and public education in particular has morphed over time. It's easy to sort of run up stories and talk about the saviors that are going to show up, or the different systems that come. And Wyoming has not been immune to those conversations, but we still have that same fundamental commitment to making sure that our kids have an equal education. One of the things that I feel we've been very successful in Wyoming has been respecting local control, local school boards, the ability to work with those. As that conversation that sort of started with, I think, core curriculum that morphed into No Child Left Behind, that went to whatever it was, Every Child Succeeds, that went to whatever these different programs often were crafted in other conditions in other states, and their application to Wyoming was sort of fuzzy and hazy. And then, we got into that national chatter about teacher accountability and how, what's the benefit of tenure and so on and so forth. And that's sort of clouded the conversation. So what I was particularly, and this is sort of a buildup, so one of the things that we've really worked hard on, what I found to be universally true is that it is incredibly important that and I think everybody knows this, that we have really good teachers. There was that national conversation about, if we have really good teachers, let's make them accountable. And so, that range sort of developed into a couple of strategies, some of which were misaligned, had the wrong incentives, and were problematic. But fundamentally, you still need to have good teachers, and you need to recognize those teachers. But more importantly, you need to let those teachers teach. The passion they have for teaching comes because of their love of teaching, not because of their, love of doing tests or anything else. And so I think as Wyoming has tried to struggle with how do we find an accountability system that says our dollars are being well spent, and at the same time not be so prescriptive as to limit the opportunity for good teachers to teach. And then the last component of that, and I'm probably going on too long, but I hope we kind of stay on this topic. The last component of that is the fact that you need to have students engaged. They need to develop. We can all remember a teacher who just made all the difference in the subject matter. And it was because we engaged as students, perhaps our classmates did too, and the teacher had the opportunity to be passionate about that. And I think as we've become so prescriptive, perhaps we've missed a little bit of the mark. And so this is my segue to, where we got to the RIDE initiative, which
I was about to ask you if this gets us right to the RIDE initiative. I understand there's a whole big strategic planning initiative around public education.
Yeah, it really was. And it was, we need to have the accountability. We need to make sure that taxpayers are confident that their dollars are being well spent. We need to make sure that students actually are proficient. And more importantly, if there are all these strategies that are coming in from elsewhere, we can learn from them. We can be informed by those, but what makes sense on the ground? And so really, if you look at, we had gotten pretty Byzantine about education. We had built all these standards and assessments that had grown to, and this was literally true, it was going to take 23 years to teach all the standards to a K-12 student, obviously too much. And we said, okay, why don't we take the time and go ask the parents, ask the students, ask the teachers, ask the schools, importantly, engage and ask the businesses that are going to, presumably hire the students, the graduates from these schools, and really from the ground up, kind of look at curriculum. It was fascinating to me. We had the biggest response that our agency at the university had ever dealt with on any public question, signifying that people were really interested in weighing in on what their kids were learning.
And does that mean they were doing it from a practical perspective, like they really wanted to participate in the discussion of it? They weren't just coming to shout slogans or make demands?
That's exactly correct. And then we followed that up in several communities around the state with open houses and workshops and real collaboration. We did this for a year. And what came out of that was some really interesting points. One was that we needed to be less aligned with, can you memorize everything the night before the test, and then take the test, and maybe in 4 days you've forgotten it. Can you on a repeated basis be able to perform the tasks that are important to you? Is it important to have flexibility in the school, in the schedule, in the approach that's taken? And we found out that was pretty critical. And we also discovered that the lexicon of education was sometimes radically different from the lexicon of industry or business. And so being able to get a shop owner talking with kids or a banker talking with a class, suddenly this whole new vocabulary and understanding of communication really developed from that. So from that, there have been a number of schools, I think 21 or something like that now, that have really taken the opportunity to bite this off in different ways. Now, it's important to remember we wanted to stress the same standards. As I said, there was 23 years. We also asked the group that was taking a look at that to really think through that based on a lot of the findings we had about what are the things that people really think their students, their kids, need to know. One of the members said, we're not building robots. What we're trying to do is educate citizens. And so that broke down into really 4 categories with a few others in a reasonable fashion. These were things that we expected students to be able to accomplish at grade level, but we left a lot more flexibility for teachers to be able to build curriculum and to build approaches to that. And more importantly, the personalities of the schools really adopted those. So I'm just going to take a moment to just talk about some of the examples that were really eye-opening to me. One was a school district that said, we're small enough. I know it can't be done on a large level, but we're small enough that one of our problems is if we're going to have band, maybe that practice is going to happen at a time when that's the only time when we can teach geometry. So you got a choice, take band or do geometry. And if you don't do geometry, maybe that's going to be problematic for you on your ACT, which we require every kid to take ACT. So the school scheduler and the teachers got together and said, we want to make sure every student in this school has access to the coursework that we can provide. So as a teacher, I will make myself available outside of the normal band practice to teach the geometry class to all those students that are there. And they've somehow scheduled it. And as it's grown, it's allowed for, let's say a student is really interested in a particular science project, and it's going to be more than an hour that they're going to do, they can then extend that, but all their other courses kind of morph with that. Now, I know that's not possible for every school, but what it means is that every student is really engaged in their education. There's another school that they are so committed to the internships in the community that they have students that go out and work in doctors' offices, students that go work in tourism industry, students that go build fence, students that do wildlife, students that are doing all of these things, but they bring them back and they have to be able to talk to the class, explain to the class, and write papers about what they've learned. And in another school, the English teacher, the science teacher, and the PE teacher take their kids out for a week or so on the river, tag fish with a game and fish, do the scientific analysis of what the species are, all of that sort of stuff. Spend time talking about the books that they're required to read and the journals that they're writing. They may also build fence, and then they start talking about geomorphology. I mean, these are not the sorts of things you get out of textbooks, but textbooks can inform that. And so these, it's just a much richer educational experience. They still have to take the same courses, but instead of saying, "Oh, I'm just going to memorize this thing," what they're doing is they're engaged in the learning process. And I'll leave you with this: the dad that I was talking to said, "It's been amazing to me because Well, I used to say, "Hey, son, how is school today?" He'd go, it's okay. What'd you learn? Nothing. And and now, when his son comes back, he's like, "How's school?" It was awesome, Dad. Well, what'd you learn? We had to really understand why Lincoln was the president he was. We had to spend, and I got to tell you, it was so interesting to hear about his youth and how that kind of put him in a leadership position. And you suddenly realize that, to me, that's the educational experience.
Governor, I know that our time is coming to a close. I have one more question I'd love to squeeze in before we wrap up, because I don't often get to talk to governors. And there's a question that I'm dying to ask you. Most of our listeners are leaders at the local level, mayors and council members and school board members and county commissioners. And I'm curious, from your perspective as a governor, what kind of ongoing relationship with local leaders is most valuable from your perspective? What are some of the things that local leaders should know that they should do or shouldn't do if they want to have a good relationship with their governor? And I'm not asking you to name names.
I would say it at the outset, I fundamentally believe that the best form of government is at the most local level. It's where we have to solve problems. We can't just be idiomatic. We can't just throw platitudes at one another. These are your neighbors. These are the people you live with. These are the people whose kids that are going to be playing with your kids. And so you really do have to come to some sort of an agreement. Doesn't mean that we all have to agree, but we can do that in an agreeable way. And we, at the end of the day, have to solve problems. At the most local level, we can do that. Once it escalates to and elevates to higher levels of government, it becomes much, much, much more difficult to do that. And I have always believed that there's a disease that affects politicians. And that disease is, the higher you go in government, the more you think you know about what everybody else is doing and how they should behave. It's a conceit that I think we all should be aware of. Your question is how best to deal with bigger politicians, bigger in the sense of higher on the sort of concentration. The best thing to do, it's obviously important always to be respectful. But at the end of the day, you're a constituent, but you're a constituent with power. You're a constituent with a group of individuals that you influence. And I think being able to not sort of overtly say, you need to pay attention to me because I represent a whole bunch of your voters. I think just gently reminding people that they are in the position they are, not because of the money they had, not because of the backing that they got, but because of the voters actually saw something in them. And I think it's important that we bring our political scope back down to that most local level.
Is this one of those places where it's helpful to build a relationship before there's a need, before there's an explicit need?
Yeah, I absolutely think that's right. I've often thought of another friend of mine. We were working a bill in Congress years ago. We walked into an office with somebody who just was adamantly opposed. We knew it was going to be a bad conversation. We still made the effort. And my friend, as we left, he said, it was one of my first lobbying efforts. He said, there are some visits where you just want to make sure that the memory they have of you is that you're a good person to talk to.
That's a great place to end this. Governor Mark Gordon, thank you so much for being open to this conversation. Thank you for sharing the wisdom of your time in office and for introducing those of us who don't know Wyoming terribly well to understanding the mindset. And it's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much for the time.
Well, thank you. It's a great conversation.
My thanks again to Wyoming Governor Mark Gordon. One thing I especially appreciate about this conversation is the reminder that what's recognized in Wyoming is true elsewhere, that strong communities are built on a blend of independence and interdependence. People thrive when they are encouraged to be capable, resilient, and self-reliant. But communities thrive when those same people understand that they are connected to something larger than themselves and that they share responsibility for one another's success. And I think that leaves us all with a worthwhile question to consider in our own leadership. How well are you balancing the values of independence and interdependence in the community you serve? And what legacy will that balance leave for the generation that follows? Hey, if this conversation sparked an insight, a question, or a perspective you'd like to share, I'd love to hear from you. Reach me at 602-688-2724 and leave a message. And if you'd be open to talking about some of the hard-earned lessons from your own leadership journey, click the guest link in the show notes. Community Catalysts is edited by Nick, Living the Dream Tantillo. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.